Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastauugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of Edgar Broughton, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love and poetry and his life in music, which was from the 60s right through to the current day. And he's got projects that are happening as we speak. I'll give you a link to his website in the notes below because you'll be able to find out what he's up to and what he's got planned, which you'll also find out in this interview. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years in music. Edgar, it's over to you.
I'm not sure, really. I remember seeing people like John Lee Hooker in the flesh at Leamington Town Hall, which actually is quite small, the hall there. When I went back there years later, I was shocked at the bands that had played there. John Lee Hooker with Fee's band, the Groundhogs at the time. Of course, Tony passed away quite recently. But,
yes.
And I mean, we had everybody there, the Hollies, the Searchers, even Screaming Lord Sutch, And I suppose it was quite, not having been to London, we hadn't moved to London then, but as an embryonic sort of band, to see people like that was absolutely fabulous.
Yes.
But to tell you the truth, one of the most iconic moments for me was when my son took me to see Chemical Brothers in Brixton. Absolutely fabulous. I was sure that at some point some of their tracks were going to make the PA rattle a bit or something. No, it was like hi-fi. It was thrilling.
Yes.
Now, I like that kind of music as well as I like rock and blues. I've always been a bit of a techno head.
Nice. Absolutely. It was listening to John Peel that got me into a lot of that kind of dance rave stuff in the 80s was my kind of generation, decade. And yes, that's where a lot of electronic music started to develop. And it was people like the Orb and a guy called Gerald. And and there was early hip hop in the early 80s with people like Public Enemy, and then a bit later on there was the Chicago house sound, and it was good stuff, really. And did your parents have any kind of interest in music or arts at all? Did they introduce you to anything or play records that you found interesting?
Yes, it was quite an eclectic kind of mix of stuff. So everything from Jimmy Shand band, Christmas, and sort of like a Scottish kind of hootenanny stuff, with Bill Haley, Little Richard, Tauber, G. Lee. A real strange mix of blues, a bit of blues, And then, of course, as we grew up and started to sort of like what we liked, they liked it too. They were an extraordinary couple, really, in many, many ways. But certainly from the point of view of their eclectic taste in music it was phenomenal, really.
Yes, absolutely. And as we trundled into the 60s, did were you? I have no idea actually. Were you there when the first kind of the Beatles period happened? And the first records came out and they first appeared on TV. Were you kind of about at that stage?
Definitely, yeah. I was born in 1947, so I kind of saw the crossover, like Video Killed the Radio Stars.
Yes.
Certainly the beat groups, and then what followed, and bands writing their own material post the 50s. There must have been lots of singers and bands from that 50s era that thought, oh, God, what's happening? It's a little bit like Uber and taxis. We're going to be out of a job. And they were, of course.
Yes.
So I was lucky. I kind of saw that changeover from like the American Little Richard rock and roll right through the Animals, Yardbirds, and Hendrix, but certainly the Beatles and the Rolling Stones' first kind of songs on telly and the radio. Yeah, I was there.
You were there, yeah, because it was kind of interesting because you had people like Lonnie Donegan who seemed to have a massive impact on people, and then you had this kind of interest in, I suppose, the Beat generation started to appear as quite a lot of people I've interviewed from that generation. It was hearing, reading Jack Kerouac's On the Road, which was quite a big influence, and then
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
and
yeah.
all that kind of stuff, and the idea of freedom and wildness, and also kind of enjoying jazz. And if you didn't enjoy jazz, knowing it was cool, and you had to appear to like jazz anyway, was quite important.
Yeah.
You know, so that was
Yeah.
kind of, and I guess you would have. You know, I know people, mention people like Duke Ellington and Fats Domino, and obviously Little Richard was this other guy who I know Lemmy and David Bowie would often say, because they were both born actually the same year you were, would always say Little Richard was that person that they went, wow,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
that's the man. It was such a shock. I mean, I know Elvis as well, but Elvis was white, whereas Little Richard was, people forget what it was like back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Such a wild dude. So there you go. So when did you get a kind of a musical instrument appear in the house?
I suppose I was about 14, and unfortunately, I made a mistake. My dad bought me a ukulele banjo with a skin kind of a drum thing. I mean, beautiful chrome, but it wasn't a guitar, so I swapped it for a Rossetti 6-string acoustic, which was impossible to play. The strings were about 1.5 inches off the fretboard. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit. But it was impossible to hold notes down, even in the sort of the first and second positions and stuff. So I really screwed that up. Then I had a little Rossetti electric with the paint actually rubbed off, the black paint rubbed off the fretboard. So it was shocking. And then I graduated to a Honor, beautiful little sort of red thing. And then in a little music shop that we loved to go in on a Saturday, a really tolerant owner called Mr. Renton. He had this shop and he did second-hand guitars, and there was a Fender Stratocaster, a Hank Marvin job with the rosewood fingerboard, the salmon pink, £50.
Wow!
And I traded the guitar in for it, but I still had to pay my mum back a sort of weekly thing. It was a lot of money then.
It's a huge amount.
But of course, but I mean, that's the guitar that's on all my albums, and except for the new one. And it's worth a lot of money now. It's stupid, really, like a lot of those kind of early instruments are. But that was the kind of chain of instruments for me. And then, of course, we were in London, and I got a couple more Stratocasters and the collection, and bit by bit.
It happened.
Yeah, but I was about 14, I guess, when I first started plinking and plonking along.
Yes. And did you, I mean, at that stage, had you started to sort of follow that kind of trend in the musical kind of narrative of the 60s as things started to alter? And by 67, the Summer of Love and the 14-hour Technicolor Dream at the Ali Pali with the world that was, psychedelic rock. Did you follow that kind of path?
I think there was something, where we lived in Warwick, Warwickshire, there was something amazing about having records that other people didn't have. And we used to go to parties with a little bag with our special records. We all did it, musicians and other people alike. So I remember an album that's, for example, there was a thing called Live at the Copacabana, and it had, Sugar Pie DeSanto, Sonny Boy Williamson, I mean, all the great blues artists on this one record. And then I started to hear little-known West Coast American bands, Pearls Before Swine.
Yes.
And a whole bunch of bands that, if you listen to R.E.M., people like that, there's no doubt that they grew up on that kind of music, But that fascinated me, with the sort of beat culture, how that had turned into the sort of early psychedelic kind of bands doing their own materials, the record company dominating what a band played was gone.
Yes.
So that fascinated me, and although I wanted to play a few Shadow songs, that was it really, until we became a blues band and started doing some blues songs. And then, of course, it was possible to sort of do a gig with your own material entirely. And that would have been about 64, 5, I guess, when the penny dropped that all the bands that were kind of doing really well were actually, although they might have some covers, Animals, House of the Rising Sun, for example, they were writing their own songs and that was really exciting, along with the clothes and the flower power. Woolworths doing sort of carrier bags with a sort of paisley print on. Eventually, we knew it was over then, of course. But yeah, that whole period was so exciting and groundbreaking, and we knew it was. It didn't matter what the olders said. Oh, that's not real music, like they said about computer music.
Yes,
we didn't care. We just didn't care because it was so all encompassing and free. As you said, it's about freedom that we were off and running. It was great.
Yes, absolutely. And were things like, I know Joe Boyd had his UFO club, didn't he? And then there was people like International Times with Barry Miles. Were you sort of taking, because I have listened to some of your records from that period. Was kind of the idea of the kind of the counterculture was going to change everything? Did you sort of kind of, I was going to say believe it, did you really sort of have that kind of commitment and feeling that it was going to change? Because I know Joe Boyd, I remember I did an interview with him, and he said that when they did the 14-hour Technicolor Dream, the next morning they walked out to the into the sunrise, and he thought, we've won, we've done it, it's going to all be different from now on. Obviously things didn't work out like that, but he said the commitment at that point was quite intense and quite real.
Yeah, you see, first of all, so International Times, when we went to London, we lived in Colville Terrace, which was a sort of hot spot for change, for fusions of music. There was a little church called All Saints Church.
Oh, yes.
And we all used to go there and jam on a Thursday night. So the Pink Floyd would show up and do a couple of numbers and so on. And a whole pretty things, loads of bands, And we weren't very far from Portobello Road, where there was this incredible black club restaurant where you could only get in there if you were a white person. You had to be in a band or something, right? So, coming from Warwickshire, that was kind of the culture that we were coming across. Looking out of the window and seeing a light show on a wall opposite, and things. So it wasn't long before we became, we'd seen International Times in Warwick, but it wasn't long before we started to meet the people, like Hoppy Hopkins, for example, and Caroline Coon, Release and stuff, and doing benefits for these people. And there used to be a thing called the International Times Run. And basically, it was a guy that we knew who we were living with, who'd got a van, filled it up with International Times, and literally went to sellers, stockists, the odd sort of like head bookshop. But we used to take turns to go with him because it was a fantastic drive, and we'd end up in, sort of the far north of England anyway, and then come home. And I remember we delivered 4 International Times and a couple of odds on 2 occasions to this Franciscan monk in Oxford. It was an amazing time. I mention him because that's kind of like anything could happen, There was a guy called Mus Murray who is still a very well thought of mystic and sort of a writer of spiritual things. And we went off to the Royal White Stones and A3 Ring and things just to sit there all night and drink in the atmosphere. And so the counterculture, and this idea that, Mr. Boyd, bless him, I can understand how he came out in the morning and felt that. But in actual fact, I'm always willing to take people who say, oh, yeah, but it didn't come to anything, to task. Because, of course, it did.
Yes.
We wouldn't have had, in my mind, the movement on political issues. Remember Clause 28?
Yes.
Right? And it got overturned. If that hadn't happened in our day, that momentous revolutionary fervour and spirit that didn't look like it actually changed society very much, or the political kind of structure, it did. It did. It made things easier, although it wasn't apparent. It's a little bit like how art changes, and then suddenly there's this new movement and everybody says, oh, that's fantastic, it's new. But if you look back, it's kind of always derivative. There were landmarks along the way, and I think we were part of that. On top of which, technically, I knew people into technology. Back then, let's say 69, 70, we visited the son of the guy who wrote Tarka the Otter, at a nice little place in Devon. And that's all I knew about this guy. And then he turned out to be a quite good guitarist, and we jammed together and stuff at his place. And he took me to his greenhouse. And in his greenhouse, he'd got a little Atari 525 actually running the watering of his hydroponic tomato plants.
God.
So, and he had a windmill that supplied the electricity for it. So a lot of this stuff that eventually came to being, and thinking about stuff, started then.
Yes.
I mean, all right, people who lived in the 20s, 30s, 40s would say, oh, no, we were aware of this, we were thinking about it. But they didn't have the materials and the actual wherewithal in terms of the technology, perhaps, to do something about it.
No.
But we did. It started, you know. Look at amplification today. It was nothing. I mean, you know, go to a concert, any concert, it's wonderful.
Yes.
Stage monitoring, in-ear monitoring, you know, you don't even need speakers in front of you. When we started, there was nothing. There was virtually nothing at all, because people had relied on, you know, people being quiet even at dances so they could hear the band. You know?
Yes, this is true.
Or they needed 20 brass players or drummers and people to... So there were all kinds of extraordinary things that began then. So... that's my take on.
That's yes.
It didn't amount to a hill of beans. It did.
Well, absolutely. There was an amazing exhibition at the V&A, which was titled something like "So You Want a Revolution," and it really captured all those seeds that you mentioned. You know, from from sort of different chapters, which kind of all altered during the 60s quite radically. And, you know, a lot of laws came in, a lot of attitudes changed. And actually it was kind of an amazing decade. And I mean, that's why it's still spoke about still to this day. And people put on these amazing sort of displays and books and everything else like that. But I have to say, when you mentioned Muzz Murray, I thought, God, I haven't heard that name for a few decades. And I remember getting in touch with him and getting I think it was a CD or some CD ROM of his book or fanzine that he brought out called Gandalf's Garden. And and Muzz Murray. Yes, I must have. It just brought a big smile to my face, because I thought, yes, he was a lovely chap that I kind of got in touch with and said, you know, I'd love to get a copy of. Yeah. He'd sort of archived all his stuff on this. A CD ROM of some, absolutely amazing. Yes,
he lives in the south of France now. He's still about. He's living in France.
Yes, magic moments. Yeah. So then, as with the, you know, as the band formed, did you feel like you had a sort of an idea of what you wanted to sound and look like?
Our idea, I mean, it was, in a way, as people described us later, we were the proto-punks. So often what we did was very simplistic. It was very raw and hard sometimes, but also quite melodic at times. And we did whatever we felt to do. We didn't really copy anybody. Well, blues, beef art a little bit, of course, and that we were influenced by people. But we didn't really, I mean, a lot of bands we played with, honestly, this is the truth, big names in our eyes, said, oh, well, you know, we're not going on before them. Why not? You know, promoters told me, well, because they're not really musicians. They only know 3 chords, which was a lie. But, you know, a bit like they might have said about the punks.
Yes.
And, of course, we used to say to promoters all over Europe, all right, let them go on after us. And when we finished doing Out Demons Out, they all changed their minds. They all changed their minds. They didn't want to go on after us ever again. So whatever it was, we had this way of communicating, apart from the music songs, some of which, so there's a couple of songs which I think will probably last forever, but maybe not so many of them. You know, time moves on and things become dated. But the spirit of what we were mostly about was connecting with an audience, communicating stuff to them.
Yes.
You know, so we'd go to a town and we either found out something about what was going on politically or what the issues were. And of course, that was a novelty for people. Oh, he cares. He knows who we are. So then when we came to sort of ask them to join in with us and do the cathartic stuff, they did.
Yes. Yes, it's interesting, and I know that there was a few bands, weren't there, from that scene, like the Deviants, who later became the Pink Fairies. I suppose was Hawkwind going at that stage as well?
It's sort of embryonic, really. Yeah, I mean, I think Lemmy was going to go and play with Jimi Hendrix, but he missed the bus or something. So no, it's true, really. I mean, he always used to say how he regretted not getting that. He started as a roadie.
That's right. Well, he was in the Rockin' Vickers, wasn't he? This one band, and then he became a roadie for Jimi Hendrix, and then Hawkwind got the bass guitar for Hawkwind, and then Motorhead, and the rest is history. So yes, there was a kind of an interesting underground movement that you were part of, and there was also people like John Peel with his Perfume Garden,
well, John Peel, of course. I mean, he one thing I would say though, which. Mick Farron, Pink Fairy, Social Deviants, right?
Yes.
Unfortunate, but kind of interestingly, a promoter got in touch with me and said, "Can you play this gig in London? It's closed now, the Borderline." Yes, I can do that. I'm on my own. Yeah, sure, that's okay. And Mick Farron's playing, so that'll be nice. And Mick had written previously a review, because he was a reviewer, of the EMI box set, the albums that we did with EMI, 4 of them. And he reviewed it, and all he wrote was inane hippie nonsense. Now, Mick was he wasn't a rival, but Mick always complained when he played with us, and he used to say, "They've got that bloody Out Demons Out, and you can't get past it." And he was right. So when and somebody said, "Oh, they saw him and he was doing some gigs in Brighton and he didn't look very well," and all the rest of it, right? So I'd got a little plan. When I turned up at the Borderline, I was going to go into the dressing room and say, "Oh, Mick, you look terrible, mate. What's happened?" Offer him a little brandy from my flask. What actually happened was I walked into the dressing room and there's this huge guy sitting there, hardly able to breathe. The percussionist had told me it was really difficult to get him out of the house that day. It was awful, and I thought, what's he doing? And I thought, my people would never let me go to a gig like this. So the gig goes on, and there's somebody out there playing, and it was their turn to go on. Again, he wouldn't go on after me, even though I was on my own, right? He still wouldn't. And as he got up from he said, "Oh, see you later, Edgar." And as he got up from his seat, I saw this big oxygen bottle, which they took to gigs in case he needed it. Anyway, about a song and I think even the first song, halfway through, he'd already said, "Oh, excuse me," before he started to the audience. I had a bit of a funny turn there, and I heard this music start, and I thought, "Oh, that's not very good." And then I heard a little bit of him singing, and then it stopped dead. So I went out, and of course, Mick had fallen over, and actually he died in the Borderline that night. So I went from sort of saying, "I'm going to sort this guy out once and for all," right, for his inane hippie nonsense. And it turned out to be, I ended up writing a song about it, because it was very sad, and it made me think of all the sort of laughs we had over the years. And the night before we played the Isle of Wight Festival, for example, we were in Rugby, okay?
Yes.
So imagine a little band like us driving all the way from Rugby overnight, no sleep, to the Isle of Wight Festival. And the Deviants were on at this gig. I don't know if they went on before us or not. I think they did. But Mick, bless him, he had a Shaw microphone stand that had this heavy cast iron bass. And he's swinging it round and it fell off on his foot. And he tried to carry on and he's hopping about like it's part of the act. And that stuck in my mind. So then we drove to the Isle of Wight Festival, and the guy wanted to put us in a tent. My mom, who was driving the van, was furious. "We haven't come all this way to play in a tent." The Pretty Things were a bit late arriving, so we got their spot. So by accident, the Isle of Wight was the first huge festival that we played to people.
Amazing.
And we just wanted to keep doing those gigs, really. So,
yes, absolutely. Was that the one that, I don't know, Chris Christopherson was on, or the one Jim Morrison and the Doors were on? Was that the first or second one you played?
I think it was the first.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know, the famous, amazing concerts actually they were. Did you, with the band, did you get you got a manager quite quickly? Was that
we did.
Pete Jenner?
We did. We were living, as I said, in Coleman Terrace. We'd only been there maybe a few weeks. And this rather delightful hippie young woman came by. And she said, by the way, she said, are you a band? And we said, yeah. She said, there's these people around the corner called Black Hill Enterprises. You should see them. So, of course, we got all our flares on with bells, literally bells on our bell bottoms, tied the ribbons in our hair and stuff. We all piled round there. And and Peter had got this gig, I think, Olympic College. And somebody let him down. He said, you'll play there tomorrow. So we said, yeah, okay. And we went there, and I remember breaking the string and borrowing somebody else's guitar, and I thanked him. I said, oh, some cat's lent me his guitar. And he shouted back, I'm not a cat, I'm a human being. But anyway, after the gig, Pete Jenner said, I've never seen anything like that. Let's do it.
Fantastic.
And then a month or two after that, we were signed to Harvest because Peter Jenner was now involved with the people putting Harvest label together. It was partly his idea.
Yes.
Of course, he got a stable of bands, most of which would fit on it, and we did. So, but that, I think we'd done an audition for Ireland before that.
Right.
And they didn't want us. They were starting to get into reggae, and they couldn't see any potential. But Jenner saw it, and Andrew King, and that was it, really. So we were with them quite a long time.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you got the first album came out quite quickly, didn't it? Sort of 69.
Yes, it did.
Which was,
yeah.
And was that recorded at EMI Studios, Abbey Road?
Yes, Abbey Road, yes.
Yes. And when you were, because all the material is being written by the band, there's no covers, are there?
No. There are extra tracks, bonus tracks. I think there's a version of Smokestack Lightning, and I think that's probably the only cover.
Yes.
But I wrote most of the material. Some of the material was written by, a bit more collectively. Yeah.
Yes, because you've got, and Pete's your producer at this stage as well, isn't he? So can you remember much about that session? Had you sort of rehearsed all the material to the absolute nth degree and you just had to go in and record it?
No. Some of it we didn't know what we were going to do next, but we've been playing this live for maybe 2 years, the first album.
Right.
And a little bit of the second album, but not really. And this is, talk to any band and they will all tell you the first album was kind of easy because they'd been playing it, little pubs, hospital fates, whatever they were actually playing the material, so that if they did get a deal, they'd kind of probably got an album's worth of stuff, which is certainly true of us. So, but it wasn't rehearsed to the sort of nth degree, as it were, because that's not the kind of band we were. We'd look at each other and extend something. I would jam something, especially the three-piece stuff, that we started out with, the trio stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And at that stage, you'd also, 69, which was an amazing year, you also did a Hyde Park free concert, didn't you, in, was it September time, with Quintessence, Al Stewart and the Deviants, which is a
Blind Faith.
Blind Faith as well, right, yes.
Well, they were top in the bill. It was about, it was like the first super group. They were awful, really, really awful, in my opinion.
Yes. Can you, at that stage, because things changed so quickly, didn't they? Did you sort of think, where is this going next, or were you just kind of living in the moment?
After that Hyde Park gig, it was a really sunny day, and I decided to walk back across the West End, I suppose, to get to a bus or whatever to where I lived in Lordship Lane. And what was really weird, there were dozens of people coming up to me, can I have your autograph? And it was the first time it had happened, and it was just that one gig that sparked it all off. So, on one level, it was, you had to be where you were in the moment, because the moment was so complex and wonderful, all sorts of new things going on. So there was, I mean, at that particular time, there was very little thought for, so what are we doing next day? We just did day by day by day. And every day, of course, we were almost every day for the first 3 years, we got a gig.
Yes.
So we just carried on, from one to the other. There'd be standout gigs. We did a Biafra benefit in Battersea Park. We did the first 3 concerts in Germany that EMI paid for. So, there was always something a bit more momentous, a bit more of an occasion that sort of came in scattered form amongst lots and lots of gigs all over the place, just touring,
Yes, amazing. When did you, and can you remember, I mean, obviously you've been asked this in every interview, Out Demons Out, can you remember how that song evolved and sort of developed? You must.
Yeah, there was a band that contained a couple of guys, Tuli Kupferberg, who had a bookshop. And he was a sort of, I suppose he was an academic, really, an intellectual who had a bookshop, but he was political. And they decided that they were going to levitate the what's it called in Washington? The house.
Yes, they were going to circle something, like some political building, and they were going to.
That's right. Yes, and they did it. And we got all these hippies to turn out, sort of out demons. So, and it was just almost a recording of a demo. By that I mean a demonstration. Yeah, a sort of political demonstration. And I just thought, whoa, what if we make this political? So on the last gig we did for Rock Palace, the last sort of televised thing in Germany, the band, I actually said the demons are still with us. They are called Government. So there was a gig in Aachen where the police were at the football pitch. 3-day festivals, wonderful, Pink Floyd, all sorts of people on. And when we arrived, me and the roadie, a bit earlier than the rest, there was all sorts of talk about the police being really violent, yeah?
Yes.
And when we arrived sort of to actually play, 20 minutes before, this girl was dragged out. I mean, I'd say a girl, maybe teenage, young woman, was dragged out of the crowd with her head bleeding by 2 coppers and a policewoman following. This is true, And then we found out that the coppers were in the director's box with infrared binoculars looking at people in the crowd, and they were dragging them out because they were smoking pot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we go on stage, and I said, we're not going to play until the police in this box move to a better place and stop being violent. Well, I stood there for, 5 minutes, nothing. And suddenly, in German, the crowd start chanting, out, demons, out, Rauch, Dämonen, Rauch. And it was massive. And my brother just tapped, we didn't play it because we wanted to do it later. So my brother tapped a drum beat out to encourage them. And about 10, 12 minutes later, we saw the lights go off and we saw these policemen leaving the director's box down the steps. And the police they withdrew to where they should have been, a little bit by the side of the stage, a little bit, like you wouldn't expect. And there was no trouble, not a thing. And I remember Nick Mason from the Floyd came and he said, fantastic. He said, that's what you do. That's what you do. And we did. We did that a lot. We used it, against oppressive people, really, wherever we could.
And I guess that's where you got your idea for the song Freedom came from as well, with the, was it Kent State, the shootings there?
University, Ohio, yes.
Yes, my God. There was, because it's...
You know about the Keele University thing?
No, vaguely.
They asked us to go and play there. They'd occupied the university. And I remember sitting in the Chancellor's office, telephoning America to speak to the students who were also barricaded in the university over there.
Right.
Quite momentous stuff. I mean, really, memorable stuff. And we gave some spray paint cans, because we used to carry them and give them people.
Yes.
And we played in this new refectory, and they covered the walls with slogans. And I've never seen so much intelligent graffiti in my life. They also graffitied the van, which I wasn't so keen on. And somebody did comment, it was all right when he gave the paint to the students, but he didn't like it himself. Fair enough, it wasn't too bad. But we went to court for that. I was prosecuted, for... Incitement to riot was the first thing that I wasn't happy about. They dropped that.
Yes, I guess the band must have been getting quite a reputation at this stage. Were people kind of scared of the band and the kind of what was happening?
It depends who you were. It depends who you were,
Right.
I mean, we were the guy Storm Hypnosis, the sleeve guy.
Oh yes.
Who did the Meat album with a real person hanging upside down at the market. It went down the market and sort of hung up there in the Meat, only for a minute while they took the photograph because they wanted to kill him. Anyway, the guy who did that, he said when Pete Jenner asked him to come and meet the band to do that sleeve, he said he was shitting himself because he'd seen the photographs and he'd heard what he'd heard. And he was scared to go around. And he wrote in his book, and when they did the book with all the sleeves that they were proud of, that they were true gentlemen, really clever, intelligent, and lovely people to meet. So that's who we really were. We were kind, we cared about people, but if you crossed us, we really, really changed. And there were maybe 8 or 9 of us, including road crew, so you didn't really want to upset us. We weren't violent, but we did have a way of getting our own way and making people feel a bit silly if they deserved it.
Yes,
I suppose.
That's right. I did an interview with Storm actually a couple of years ago. There was the book Us and Them, the authorised story, wasn't it, of hypnosis?
Yeah.
Or I don't know. There's been several recently, which has been quite amazing.
Yeah.
So as the optimism of the '60s, though there was the Vietnam War and race riots and lots of other issues going on, but there was other underlying good things. I mean, then we have the death of Brian Jones, and then suddenly Hendrix, Joplin, and Morrison all sort of passing in such a quick kind of couple of months. What was it like for you, sort of, as a musician, realising these were people that you'd probably were quite aware of, and then suddenly thinking, gosh, that's kind of a sobering moment?
Well, I suppose, to put it simply, very, very sad, and be careful what drugs you take and how much. Yes, that's good advice. Did you? Oh, are you still there? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it got so quiet. Sorry, it went so quiet. I thought...
I was just trying to abbreviate my answers, because if we're going to get to where it is now, we're going to take a long, long time.
Yes, it would take quite a bit of time, wouldn't it? Yeah, and then as you went to do your second album, Sing Brother Sing, was that... What was the momentum and the atmosphere like with the band at that stage? Because suddenly it's the pressure to record a whole new album and get back and get a different focus than playing live.
I suppose we didn't really go with all that. There was pressure, so I think we really made something we just wanted to do, and it didn't quite work in terms of just what we wanted to do, for us. In fact, we never really did that until Superchip, but. So, I mean, there was some good stuff on that album, but I think it was the third album, with Evening Over Rooftops, etc., where we really had this concerted effort to pull together all the best bits of who we were and what we could do. Whereas before, the first album, like I said, that was more or less what we'd been playing. A couple of things were written for it. The second album was a little bit of that, but it was mostly... some new writing and trying to do things a little bit differently that we hadn't thought of. But we never were like, we never had this style that just carried over. We were always doing odd little things, And of course, Evening Over Rooftops was one of them,
Yes.
I mention that because that's probably the one that most people know and love.
Yes, absolutely.
So that was the third album. And then after that, we changed management. It was a mistake. I would have missed the experience, but it was a mistake. We went with a bunch of people called Worldwide Artists, NEMS, who were actual gangsters. They really were gangsters and have been gangsters, you know. Pat Meehan and that crew. And mates of Don Arden and the Black Sabbath.
Right, yes. Don,
you know.
The famous Don.
Yeah, I mean, we actually took Worldwide Artists to court in front of a High Court judge with a little hippie solicitor, Brian, who was absolutely gorgeous.
Yes.
And they took everything. They wanted the Range Rover, they wanted the truck, they wanted the equipment, all kinds of stuff, you know. And we went before this High Court judge, and we went twice, and he was so annoyed that they didn't even show up at all or send anybody, that he gave us everything that he thought we should have that belonged to us, rights of music, the whole lot. And I don't think that's ever, I mean, it was because we weren't like the Rolling Stones or whatever. I think it didn't really make the press as much as it might have, although Private Eye did a 5-page spread about it, because it was unique. But it was fantastic to be rid of that thing, you know. I mean,
yes.
These were the days when they sent some roadies to our studio in North London, broke in and took all the equipment.
Yes.
And put it in their warehouse. So what do you do? What would a normal band do? Or they might get a solicitor, or they might go and tell their mom and dad and cry a bit. So we sent some Hells Angels to their studio or their warehouse, and we emptied it completely. So now we've got all our equipment back, but we've got about 4 or 5 other bands' equipment as well that had been taken from them. You know, so we've now got this, and they go to court, and we asked them, and we won. And it was, you don't really need that in a musical career, but I must admit, because of the nature of some of the stuff we were involved with and in, it was quite an exciting time to actually tell these people, we're not frightened of you at all. You can do what you like. You know, we'll take you on.
Yes.
We made a couple of good albums, sort of with their own bandages. We actually stole the tapes from. I say stole the tapes. They stupidly put them by the front door for somebody to pick up to go into storage, and we just happened to be coming by and we saw them, so we picked them up and went to Norway to finish it, knowing that, of course, they did have some rights to some of it, and we were quite prepared to discuss that and sit down, and we did, and worked that all out. But that album would never have got finished if it wasn't for Arnie Bendixson in Norway, who said, come and live here for a couple of months and finish your album. And then, of course, Mike Oldfield, we went down to his place. Then he played mandolin on it and some stuff, and we mixed some stuff, and he was really good about all that. So, but we were forced to do that partly because of this situation with our management, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
God, that's extraordinary. I know I spoke to a few American New York musicians who had the similar thing with the mafia in New York, because I think most of New York was run, clubs especially in places were run by the mafia or had mafia connections. And there was another famous guy called Morris Levy, who was one of those kind of thug entertainment managers who, just, and I think John Lennon had a lot of problems with him because I think he decided he was going to take over John Lennon's life. And God, it's kind of a weird one. We forget how horrendous those kind of experiences are, really. But Don Arden is quite famous, isn't he, for dangling someone out the window. I'm not sure if that's completely true, but it sounds...
Well, I mean, the thing about Don Arden is, you see, there are stories that are sort of partly true and partly not true. Sharon tried to run him over once in the drive. I went to his... You'll like this. I went to his house once because I was involved with one of his mates. Oh, come in, Edgar. Come in, right? So I go in, and there's this long hall full of onyx and tasteless shit. And right at the end of it, there's a Bible lectern, gold eagle lectern. And there's a book on this lectern. So I walk up to it, and he says, oh, you religious? I said, no, not really. And I open, it's a Bible. It's a beautiful leather-bound Bible. He turns around to me and he says, "Guess where I got that?" I said, "I've no idea, Don." So he said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm going round to Luke old Andrew, what's his name,
Luke, Andrew Luke.
Rolling Stones. Man.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Log.
And he says, he walked in there, and this lecture's in there, right? And it's got the Kama Sutra on it. So he says, "I'm not having that. What do you think you're doing?" This is Don Arden, right? "You can't put that on a thing like that. How much do you want for it?" So, of course, Holden says, "So much." And he says, "So I bought it. And here it is. What do you think?" And I didn't tell him what I thought. So we haven't got time to go into the conversation that I had with sort of IRA sympathisers and stuff in this same night in this place, with these huge dogs barking outside every time anybody came within yards of the place. It was a strange situation. But his mate, who lived on the Isle of Wight, in his book, he says how in Chicago he was having dinner with a mafia don, and Don kept taking the piss. And this happened on 2 occasions. And when Don went to the toilet, this Don said to the other guy, "Sort him out, we ain't going back to England." This was how it was.
Yes.
I was staying with this guy, and his tailor came round to get some money for a suit that he was owed for. And he goes to the door with a Luger, opens the door and says, "What do you think you're doing coming round my," unbelievable stuff, So we were well shot of them,
Yes, absolutely. And there's
well read.
There was kind of a not a famous picture, but quite an iconic picture of David Bowie at the Ziggy Stardust event, where there's Lulu, Mick Jagger, Jeff Beck, and yourself. Were you at that? Had you known much of or been following David's career up to then?
Well, we were mates. I mean, at Brighton Dome one night, there was a bill put together by this promoter. The long story cut short, and his band was on right after David, who was solo still. And I remember hearing Space Oddity and going out and thinking, how does he do that? How does he sound like that with just him and a guitar?
Yes.
Fabulous, right? Angie was around, lovely. That's the first time I met her. And so this band goes on, the promoter's band, and they took up loads and loads of time to the point that our roadies went on and pulled the power out on them.
Yes.
So we could only just get our set to get in because of the time that was left. And they cut the power off. I mean, not our roadies, but the Brighton Council people. It was the Dome, right? So we carried on out Demons Out with just drums. We'd done it before for various reasons. And David came on and sang it with me. And we just shouted it right in the crowd. And then in the end, that finished, and off we went. And we both got a letter, David and myself, from the council saying that we were banned from life, for life, from ever appearing at the Dome again.
Blimey.
I wished I'd still got the letter. There's lots of things I wished I'd still got. But yeah.
That wasn't...
So anyway, of course, I went to the gig and saw him kind of like surprise the rest of the band by telling them that this was the last gig. And it was in the picture and stuff. And it was a lovely party. It was a great night. Fantastic. I would have about 6 a.m.
Absolutely. Because I do remember I did an interview with a guy called, is it Billy Ritchie, who was in a band called Clouds or 123, and I think I don't know if you ever remember, they were a bit like the early prog band. He was a keyboard player, and I think he was talking about some of the gigs he played with Bowie at that stage in the early 70s, if not late 60s, when he was still quite acoustic. Right, yeah. But yeah, so you followed his career from that first album with Space Oddity through to Hunky Dory and Ziggy Stardust. And was it Aladdin's?
Well, I mean, I didn't sort of follow his career. I mean, we did gigs together and stuff, and we had conversations now and then. I mean, he wanted me to play at one point on a track called The Candidate. He wanted me to play guitar, but as Charles Shaw Murray said, He tried because David got in touch with him. But we didn't have mobile phones then and internet and stuff. So they couldn't get hold of me. And then 2 days later, David went to Switzerland and had his breakdown. And so that was the end of that. But we did like the early art centres, together. And so we known each other on and off, all sorts of... and I knew Angie very well because we lived close by each other many, many years later.
Yes. Did you also meet Tony DeFries and Main Man and all that gang?
Yes, yeah, kind of, yeah. I mean, again, a bar or a speakeasy, one of those gigs.
Yes, because there were clubs in London at that time called a Sombrero Club, which was quite famous for sort of outrageous characters and interest in sort of nightlife. Were you mostly just in the studio playing gigs, or were you sort of part of any kind of community in London of hanging out with other musicians and bands at that stage?
No. I mean, I used to go to the speakeasy sometimes because it was a place just for musicians and friends. But I never went clubbing much or partying much. That had always been my kind of style, really. I never did.
No.
I wasn't really a party person.
No, God, they're hard work.
But, yeah.
Yes.
Can I just ask you, David?
Yeah.
How long is this going to go on for? Because we're only halfway through the career at the moment.
Sorry. Yes. Sort of. I don't know. Another. Have you got a date? Have you got? Yeah. It's nearly 4. Yeah. Is this? Do you have another 15 minutes? I don't know. 15, 20 minutes. Is that okay? Or you?
Yeah. That's okay.
Okay.
Provided we can move on and get to sort of some of the more recent stuff.
Yes.
Because I'll tell you why I say this. Because it's one of my strap lines when I'm doing a gig. I often say, although I will play songs like Evening on the Rooftops, I often say to people, I'm not a museum.
No.
I'm an artist. And it's absolutely essential, therefore, that I live in the here and now and make stuff, or not do it,
Yes.
So I mean, I don't mind talking about all the ancient history because, of course, it is important. And some of the things that are going on concurrently with, the band and my band are very interesting. But
yes, okay, well that's fine. Shall we just jump to now, and we can go back to them. Yeah. So
yeah.
So what's the kind of the projects that you're working on at the moment? Because it is, yes, you're right. It is it's just as interesting of what people are doing now than what they were doing sort of, 30, 40 years ago now. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So what's been the last 5 years and the kind of the current period that you're working on?
Well, the band broke up about 12 years ago. Not even going to go into that. It's well reported. I've done interviews about that. But it really was the end when we'd resurrected ourselves, like people do, a few times for all sorts of strange reasons. But it finished, and I was left in a situation where I really honestly didn't know what to do. But there was a slogan from when I was a kid, trade union slogan, and it was a fair day's pay for a fair day's work.
Yes.
And this rang around my head I don't know why. It came in, and what's the significance of this? And then it dawned on me. I will play anywhere in the world to one person, 10 people. They could fill a pub with the back on. I don't care where it is or what it is. I will play for them for 1 day of their pay and somewhere to sleep and my lodging, as it were, my food,
yes.
and drink. And I played all over Norway, all over the UK, some gigs in Germany. It was wonderful. Once I played to one guy, sitting in front of him, a guy who was really ill. I played to 4 people in the kitchen in Sheffield. I played to 1,000 people in Trondheim in Norway. It was all about individuals saying, come to my home.
Yes.
And meeting people in their houses and stuff, it was absolutely thrilling. So then, of course, I'm starting to do solo gigs. And people were really, really surprised. And I was doing supports for people like Roger Chapman and, the Dutch band, what they called Focus.
Focus, yes.
and lots of other things. And they were all saying, hey, this really works with us and stuff. And so that was going really well. And then, I did that. I've been doing that ever since. Yeah, certainly for the last sort of 7-8 years.
Right.
And then, of course, we got COVID. That came.
That did come.
So that stopped. So, I've got some music recorded, more music than songs, really, bits of instrumental stuff. And during COVID, I decided I am going to make the album. And it's a project, and if I'm really honest, it was started 15 years ago in terms of bits of music. And so my brother certainly couldn't play drums anymore. He was becoming ill. My bass player he has some quite disabling kind of conditions as well. And so there was only me but I thought, okay, I need perhaps I can get my bass player, sort of working on some stuff, and it's better than not doing anything. And it turned out, because we were under the COVID regime, we could spend as much time as we liked doing it on a laptop in my bedroom.
Yes.
And then I wanted some strings, and I tried something, it didn't work. Somebody on Twitter suggested this guy who lives in Sweden. So I contacted him. He sent me parts. I've never met him. We've never had a telephone conversation or email. And he sent me some wonderful stuff. He plays guitar as well. He's fabulous.
Yes.
So Arthur, the bass player, who was always under the pressure like I was, come on, guys, we've spent half an hour on this track already. It is Abbey Road or whatever. We're paying so much an hour. It was, well, Arthur, that bass is quite good, but could you this and that? And he'd do version 3, version 4, version 5,
Mm.
And so I was doing all the programming, all the synths, all the string arrangements and everything, right? Guitar.
Yes.
Acoustic guitar. And Arthur also played some slide guitar. And then a mate of ours from way, way back, a guy called John Leckie.
Oh, yes, John
producer.
Leckie. Yes, John Leckie. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Radiohead, Muse, Verve. I could go on, hundreds. Anyway, when we first went to Abbey Road on our first album, he was an apprentice. And his first day's work was on that album, Wassa Wassa.
Oh, wow. So
Arthur sort of is talking to John, like his mates, like, hey, John, what you up to? And John's saying, what are you doing? He said, I'm working on some songs, Oh, right, send me something. So Arthur sends him the first couple of songs that we did. And John said, I love this, so I want to mix it. So bless him, John Leckie has mixed the entire album just because he likes it.
Fantastic.
So that's where we're at. It's called Break the Dark. And if you can give me, well, I've got your email address. So what I will do, if you want,
yes,
I will actually send you a link to Dropbox where you can download a couple of the tracks and play them.
That would be amazing. I would love to do that.
It doesn't come out until the autumn anyway, so you would have a sort of exclusive.
An exclusive on this new project. Oh, this is fantastic. And that's that. And have you got the artwork? Has that all been done as well?
More or less, yeah. There's a painter called Ian Pearsall that I've been making some music for and cutting up his stuff into video. Just because, we can today. We can converse, we can send stuff, download stuff, whatever, share stuff. So he's done the sleeve, the painting for the sleeve, and he's done some fragments of stuff with pictures of me and stuff. So we've got the components for it. We've got all the lyrics, obviously.
Yes.
And so, it's called Break the Dark, by the way. The album's called Break the Dark.
Break the Dark.
First time ever that I've done an album with a title track,
Yes.
So, where the song is.
And are the songs... do they, just kind of curious, have you kept them quite short? Are they quite experimental? Are they quite long? Do you sort of, what subjects do you kind of explore on the album?
Well, I explore, I suppose, the way I see what's going on. Break the Dark is a song about smiling at people, if you like. The big thing about that is... A Smile Can Break the Dark.
Yes.
There's a song called Bella Trevelyan, which is a completely made-up ballad about a fictitious person. But she's a pirate. Not a pirate, but she's a wrecker.
Yes.
So she swings her lantern, her beacon, as it were, like they used to do in Cornwall to mislead the ships to go onto the rocks. But in actual fact, it's a song about spaceships. But you don't really know that until the end.
Right.
And so it's really varied, but it's a reinvention, really. It's partly acoustic, it's got strings, it's quite partly rock. But I mean, everybody that I'm working with is quite pleased with it and thinks that it'll be well received in a very, very surprised way. I think most people that hear it can't believe it's me. I can't. But honestly, I love it. I love every single beat of it, and I can't say that about any other album so far.
No, but that sounds exciting because it's probably been quite a long time since you've had a new album out, and
well, Superchip was the last. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes, that was 40 years ago. Oh, you do sound much more. You do sound. Has this kind of been quite a relief to sort of be able to put a lot of that to one side and think about, rather than just, as you said, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, thinking, oh, this is much more interesting now.
Well, it's partly. It's not that I want to put the past away, of course, but I don't want to. Like I said, I don't want to be a museum or consider that, you know.
Yes.
And I never wanted to be a cover band of the Edgar Broughton Band. And unfortunately, today there are lots of bands going around with the original name, and it's a cover band, really. It's people playing those songs who weren't there, who didn't write them, and so on.
Yes.
I'm not going to give any names, but I could, bands I've seen recently, and I just think it's a waste of time. So I wanted to divorce myself from that concept. And this is me. This is my album. It's about what I believe, what I stand for, what I think, with a little bit of, surreal, abstract, impressionistic things. It's not all clear, it's not this is that and that's black and that's white. There's room for people to interpret some of the songs in any way they like, which is true of some of the songs going back in the past, but in a way that I think is much more acceptable to a wider audience. So, for example, on my gigs that I've been doing, I've noticed that whereas it used to be the chaps meeting the Edgar Broughton Band and the girlfriends and wives and partners were sort of stood there smiling, now it's the women asking me the questions more and who are genuinely interested in the songs, talk about the songs. So for me, that's a breakthrough because it means that I've kind of expanded a little bit. It's a bit broader. It's a bit more, it's got more sort of, the seesaw's leveled,
Yes, absolutely. And with the writing at the moment, do you sort of mostly be able to, just focus and get one song done, or do you sometimes have to sort of go back and work on sort of tracks that you sometimes get slightly stuck with? I just wonder what that creative process.
All the best songs come almost immediately. We call it the muse. But basically, most of the time it's really, really hard work. You come up with a great first verse or a chorus, and then you have to do all the work to make it all similar and all of the same standard, Because I'm not somebody who just knocks lyrics out, like a lot of people do, But I suppose the most important thing is that I feel free to do what I like, and it's the first time that I've ever worked with a bunch of people who actually know this is my album. They're working on, Edgar Broughton's album. It's not the band, and that's really liberating. I mean, it might not be. It could be really daunting and horrible, but it's turned out to be fantastic,
Yes. Yeah. Is it something that you wished you'd done earlier in life and went?
Couldn't have done it earlier for lots of reasons, and what I've no regrets really. Not because I realised the story had to need the next part and next week's part and then a years later. Without all the events that do happen, you can't arrive anywhere.
No,
because you're not really on the journey. You're not on a journey, I mean, yes, it might have been interesting if I could have done this 10 years ago, but I've done it now. Maybe this is a time when record companies are looking for people like me to do something different. I don't know. Maybe they weren't, 10 years ago. So I'm really happy I've got a record deal. It's great,
Oh, brilliant.
The Edgar Broughton Band couldn't get a record deal to save our lives after Superchip.
No.
I mean, we didn't try very hard, but we kind of knew the score, and we ambled along and shambled along for quite a long time. But this is different. This is very serious. I'm very committed to this album, and hope it reaches the audience that it should.
Yes. And what label?
I've got to go.
Oh yeah. So what?
Some bait at the ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. What label are you going to be on now?
Well, it's eclectic under the auspice of Cherry Red Records, which is now becoming the largest independent in the country.
Indeed, we love Cherry Red.
Look,
have an amazing time at the coast.
I will do.
And thank you ever so much. And yes, I'll keep in touch. But have a nice time. And thanks again, Edgar.
All right, David.
Take care.
Excellent.
Take care.
I've enjoyed it.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. Massive thanks to Edgar Broughton for giving me the time for that interview. This has been the C86 Show. I'm David Eastauugh. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show. All these interviews have been archived, mostly of the 80s indie scene, but other decades as well. So check those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.